The British creating the first tank and being one of the key factors to the Allied success of the First World War, breaking the trenches deadlock. Then was Germany utilising them in the Second World War with their revolutionary blitzkrieg tactic. Over 6,000 tanks would fight in the Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in history. In World War II there would be many famous aces for many different disciplines: sniping, tank aces, fighter pilot aces, even U-boat captains. Each would become famous celebrities within the Third Reich and be showered with medals and honours. Few would survive the war. Even today you will find these men's graves never without flowers. Michael Whitman easily being the most famous of the tank aces and the highest decorated, known for his highly aggressive and risky tactics. Born in 1914 to the son of a farmer from Bavaria, entering national service in the army in 1934, then later joining the SS, going on to volunteer for Hitler's personal bodyguard, and first seeing action in the summer of 1941 in Ukraine. His first posting would be with a reconnaissance unit with a Sturmgestürz, nicknamed Stooge, or assault gun in English, a small turretless tank with a low profile, predominantly for infantry support and reconnaissance, not meant for tank-on-tank engagements. Built on the chassis of a Panzer III with a 75mm cannon that can only be moved 20 degrees either side, meaning that the driver largely has to aim the cannon, with the gunner making final adjustments. Even on his first encounter with Russian tanks, being the impressive T-34s, Whitman, occupying high ground and surveying the landscape, noticing 6 T-34s coming from the northeast and further 12 from the east, combined 18 Russian tanks against Whitman's 1, ordering his driver to reverse down the hill and let the Russians occupy it. As the T-34s came over the crest of the hill, Whitman opened fire with a direct hit on the underbelly of the tank, reloading and knocking out a second tank, but a third firing a shot and just missing him. Whitman then retreated and used its low profile to hide the tank in a wooden area, only firing on the Russians again when they were in a vulnerable position, knocking out a further 3 and destroying 6 of the Russian 18 tanks. For his actions he was awarded the Iron Cross Second Class and sent back to Germany to train as a SS officer, rejoining the fighting as a second lieutenant in command of a Tiger I for the Battle of Kursk, fighting Russian T-34s in a dug-in position, knocking out 8 tanks and 12 anti-tank guns in a single day. Whitman had his gunner fire on the move. Nazi doctrine was to never shoot while moving, the Germans thinking it was a waste of ammunition. Nearly all of the tank aces would master the tactic of shooting on the move. Later, after destroying a Russian convoy in Ukraine, in January 16, 1944, he was awarded the Knight's Cross. Then in February he was summoned to the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's Eastern Front military headquarters, and was awarded the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, personally by Hitler. Even though there were higher scoring aces, Whitman would be the most adored, giving speeches to factory workers and appearing in propaganda reels, newspapers and magazines. While on leave, the 30-year-old Whitman married 19-year-old Hildegard Burmester. Hitler even attended the wedding and given the couple a copy of Mein Kampf as a wedding present. Taking his wife to Normandy, his new posting after his leave and tour of Germany, Normandy would be the scene of his most famous exploit. Sent to face the joint British and Canadian lines, encountering 138 Allied tanks and armoured vehicles with only 6 Tigers, but stretched out and catching the Allies completely off guard in the thick of the Normandy hedgerows, Whitman surprised the column with just his single Tiger. The British, in a single-filed line stacked back to back, Whitman drove down by them, knocking them out one by one, tanks and armoured vehicles, as he advanced down the column, driving into the town of Villers-Bougat, which had already been occupied by the British, further engaging any armoured vehicles, knocking out 14 tanks, 15 armoured troop carriers in a single day before his tank was hit by an anti-tank gun in the centre of town, Whitman ordering the crew to abandon the Tiger. Meeting Hitler in July of 1944, adding 2 swords to his Knight's Cross. By early August, Whitman was now acting captain of his unit. A huge force of 300 British and Canadian tanks powered towards the town of Sinto. Whitman's division leader, Colonel Kurt Meyer, ordered Whitman with forces of 8 Tigers to slow their advance. Driving his tanks down a narrow country road, unknowing to him Canadian tanks were hidden behind a tall brick wall, and opposite to them British tanks were hidden in a wooded area, Whitman splitting his tanks into 2 columns, not knowing that he was surrounded on both sides. Then the British, seeing his forces in two sections, radioed to the Canadians. Then the Canadian tanks knocking down the wall and just exposing the Sherman tank enough so their gunners could see the German Tigers. The Allies at this time having the Sherman Firefly, a traditional Sherman M4 but paired with the powerful British 76mm 17-pound anti-tank gun capable of penetrating 130mm, easily enough to knock out a Tiger. The Canadians opening fire at less than 200 metres and knocking out 3 of the 4 tanks on the left column closest to the wall, then Whitman advancing alone, taking a number of hits before finally the internal ammunition exploding and blowing the turret off the tank, dying August 8, 1944, credited with over 135 confirmed knockouts. Kurt Schnippel having the highest number of knockouts, with 168 confirmed, possibly as high as 195, but 126 as the gunner and 42 as the commander. Born in today's Czech Republic, then the Sudetenland, on September 20th, 1921, his father working in a car factory, Kurt would later join him, undertaking an apprenticeship, something he later stated he hated doing. Being familiar with mechanised vehicles, choosing to join the armoured branch of the Wehrmacht, aged 18, receiving basic infantry training at Sargen in Lower Silesia, then being trained on the Panzer Is, II and IV, and learning both loading and gunner roles, as well as the driver, completing 9 months of training in June 1941. First seeing action in Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, being a Panther gunner and reaching as far as Stalingrad. Credited with 12 kills before being sent home in January 1943 to be trained on the new Tiger Is, taking part in the Battle of Kursk. Interestingly, for being the third Reich's highest scoring tank ace, Schnippel was hardly decorated compared to his contemporaries. One theory is because of an alleged assault on an Einsatzgruppen officer and having little respect towards military discipline, authority figures, and having a relaxed view on military regulations, such as his unconventional goatee and longer hair. He would eventually receive the Iron Cross First Class after destroying his 15th tank, but would be never awarded the prestigious Knight's Cross. Though being recommended it for it 4 times, Schnippel always let others take credit for his actions and step back. Schnippel had the longest tank kill of World War II, knocking out a T-34 at 3,000 metres. Predominantly fighting on the Eastern Front, but briefly fighting on the Western Front around the town of Caen, taking part in the retreat from Normandy. Not much information is known around Schnippel's death, but that he was wounded in the head during an engagement with the Soviets in Czechoslovakia, dying 2 hours later in a field hospital, 10 days before the end of the war. Buried in an unmarked mass grave behind a church, he was later rediscovered in 2013 during an archaeological dig and reinterred in Brno Military Cemetery, dying aged just 23. Otto Karius is one of the few tank aces to survive the war, joining the Wehrmacht as an infantryman in 1940 May, being twice refused for being underweight, once finishing basic training, volunteering for the Panzer Corps, first seeing action as a loader in Operation Barbarossa. Karius was wounded on many occasions, in 1941 suffering shrapnel wounds, and in July of 1944 almost being fatally wounded while on a reconnaissance mission on a motorcycle ahead of his tank battalion. Scouting a local town, he was shot 4 times in the back and once through the neck and once through the arm and leg, rejoining his battalion and surrendering to the Americans on the 15th of April 1945. In his autobiography, Karius also claims to have shot down a Soviet plane, something entirely possible. Karius was credited with over 150 tank kills, but claiming the figure to be around 100, as he only counted kills when he was the gunner, being highly decorated and receiving the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, opening a pharmacy shop after the war, named after his Tiger tank, Tiger Apotheke, writing a book of his experiences in the war called Tigers in the Mud. He gives many detailed accounts of his tactics and strategies during the war, claiming he could always spot a novice as they were eager to fire first, dying aged 92 in January 2015. Other notable tank cases being Johannes Bolter, credited with 139 knockouts, and Ernest Bachmann, with at least 82 tanks and an array of armoured vehicles. It's important to realise that many of the aces themselves dispute the actual number accredited to them. Just like modern special forces personalities, there are countless opinions that discredit the achievements or claim them to be entirely fictional, also with the Nazi propaganda machine looking to inflate numbers.